Hello. Today I will tell you about a case that Dr. Henry Lee participated in solving. Initially, it was just a simple arson case. But it ultimately turned into a bizarre murder case. A 235-year-old iconic building suddenly caught fire. The police discovered that the fire was not as simple as it appeared. However, faced with the ruins after the fire, the police were helpless. They had to seek help from forensic expert Dr. Henry Lee. With Dr. Lee's assistance, the police finally identified the arsonist. However, right before the trial, a key witness was murdered, plunging the case into a deadlock. After deeper investigation, they uncovered a case within a case. Ultimately, Dr. Henry Lee, using his sophisticated criminal investigation techniques, successfully solved the inner case. So, what exactly happened in that small town that hadn't seen a murder in 14 years? Who was the culprit behind it? Next, let's turn back time to 1985 to analyze the details of the case together. Salisbury is a town located in the northwest corner of Connecticut. In the 1980s, this small town had only about 3,000 residents. The scenery here is incredibly beautiful. Like a painting, it's just a 2.5-hour drive from New York. Many New Yorkers came to the hills and lakes here to seek tranquility and peace. This made the town increasingly prosperous, once becoming a famous resort area nearby. Around 1 a.m. on August 1, 1985, the Salisbury Town Fire Department continuously received multiple calls reporting a fire. The callers said that the iconic building of Salisbury, the Town Hall, was on fire. The Town Hall was essentially like the municipal government building we refer to today. It was not ordinary, with a 235-year history, and was the most valuable historical architectural structure of the town. Moreover, inside the town hall were many antiques and precious documents. If all these items were burned, the consequences would be extremely serious. Upon receiving the fire reports, the fire department immediately dispatched firefighters to the scene. However, since the town hall was old, not equipped with firefighting equipment, and filled with flammable materials, the fire was very fierce. Extinguishing it was very difficult. Although the firefighters did their best, they could only save a limited number of antiques. The historical building that had been carefully protected for over 2 centuries was burned down. This made the town residents extremely saddened. After the fire was extinguished, both the police and the residents felt that there was something strange about this fire. Because it was midnight, and the air temperature was not sufficient for the town hall to spontaneously combust. Therefore, it was very likely that someone had intentionally set the fire. Another strange point was that a glass window of the town hall showed signs of being broken. Therefore, the police began to investigate the cause of the town hall fire. But at the scene, apart from the broken glass fragments, they did not find any other clues. At this time, the town residents began to feel uneasy and fearful, afraid that the arsonist would strike again. They even slept with the lights on at night, a phenomenon that had never happened before. To quickly find the arsonist, the police thought of Dr. Henry Lee, who had absolute prestige in the field of physical evidence at that time. At that time, Dr. Lee was living in Connecticut, not far from Salisbury, so the police sent the collected samples from the scene, along with photos of the scene, to the Connecticut Forensic Science Laboratory. They hoped that Dr. Lee could assist in the investigation and quickly determine the cause of the fire. After looking at the scene photos, Dr. Lee's first impression was that the fire was very likely caused by humans. But relying solely on intuition was not sufficient. As an expert in physical evidence, Dr. Lee immediately began experimenting with the evidence. First, the forensic team conducted reburn tests on the charred samples. From the steam generated during combustion, they detected a small amount of combustion accelerant. Just this point was enough to prove that the fire was caused by humans. Next, the forensic team continued to analyze the steam generated during combustion. They used a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. This equipment analyzed and found that the components contained evaporated gasoline. At this point, the meticulous Dr. Henry Lee concluded that this was definitely a fire intentionally set by someone. After obtaining this result, the police immediately began investigating each person in the town. Fortunately, the town was not large. Very quickly, the police discovered a suspect named Roy D. Roy was a local resident who used to work at the town hall. He had a severe drinking habit. Later, due to alcoholism, he was fired. If he was resentful because of this, then, in a fit of anger, set fire to the town hall. This motive seemed reasonable. Moreover, someone saw that his beard and hair showed signs of being burned. Therefore, the police began to focus all their efforts on investigating Roy. However, this investigation process continuously encountered obstacles. Because the D family had settled here early on, these local residents were quite united. Moreover, people were somewhat afraid of Roy. He was not a gentle person. Therefore, the police had difficulties in the investigation. No one was willing to reveal any information related to Roy. The police had no choice but to expand the search scope. Finally, at a bar in the north of the town, they found a clue. Someone had seen Roy at this bar. As mentioned earlier, Roy liked to drink. He often drank at nearby bars. On the night of the fire, Roy and his friend M. Day drank at this bar. The police suspected that M. Day might know some inside information or even that he was involved in the arson. Therefore, the police investigated M. Day. After investigation, they found that he did not have a stable job, often doing temporary work to make a living, living with his family in a small row of houses behind the town's craft store. This small row of houses was also called the M. Day area by the town residents. At first, when the police approached M. Day for a talk, he was very uncooperative. To get M. Day to cooperate, the police threatened that if he didn't cooperate, they had ways to prove that he was involved in this case. At that time, he might have to go to prison. Hearing about going to prison, M. Day immediately panicked and hurriedly expressed his willingness to cooperate. M. Day confessed. Roy was the arsonist. And when he set the fire, I was by his side. On the night of the fire, Roy and I were drinking at the bar until dawn. Then we went to the town hall. Roy took a can of gasoline from his truck, intending to burn down the town hall. At that time, I tried my best to persuade Roy. But he didn't listen. Roy broke the window of the town hall and poured gasoline inside. At that point, I was very scared and left first. Although I didn't witness Roy setting the fire with my own eyes. A few minutes later, Roy caught up and told me that the town hall was on fire. Therefore, I thought that it must have been Roy who did it. M. Day continued. After I got home and lay on the bed, I couldn't sleep because I also had feelings for this town. Not long after, the sirens sounded from the town hall. At that time, I was very sad, so I decided to go back to help the firefighters put out the fire. After that, I was fighting the fire at the town hall all night. The police hoped that M could testify in court against Roy. Initially, M did not agree. After the police exhausted all efforts to persuade him, M finally agreed but made a strange and incomprehensible request. I want the police to beat me up. The arson case seemed to have temporarily concluded. Although there were some difficulties, overall, it was relatively smooth. The case details were not complicated. The fire was caused by humans. Roy had a motive for arson. Now there was a witness. As long as nothing unexpected happened, the case would soon be closed. But things did not go as planned. The case suddenly had a twist right before M. Day was to testify in court. At around 7 a.m. on October 23, 1986, two women fishing near the town discovered the body of M on the bank of a pond. His head and body had been shot a total of 3 times. The arson case that should have been closing now could not only not be concluded, but now there was another murder case. The case details became even more complicated. It was known that this small town had not had a murder case in 14 years. The death of M. Day made the town residents even more fearful. The police didn't even need to analyze carefully to know who the suspect was. Because M was supposed to testify against Roy the next day, his death was most beneficial to Roy. However, to accuse Roy, they still needed concrete evidence. Protecting the crime scene became particularly important. But at this time, the weather forecast indicated that a storm was about to arrive. This storm would definitely destroy all evidence at the crime scene. To collect evidence before the storm arrived, The police specially dispatched a helicopter to pick up Dr. Henry Lee. Finally, 2 hours before the storm arrived, Dr. Lee reached the scene. But with only 2 hours, Dr. Lee and the forensic team could only collect a limited amount of evidence. So let's see what clues were found at the scene. Clue 1. The murder weapon. Based on the scratches on the bullets found at the scene, it could be determined that the weapon was a Smith & Wesson model .459 9mm pistol. The victim was shot in the head, leading to death. However, this important weapon had not been found. The police believed that the killer might have thrown the gun into the nearby pond after committing the crime. So they sent divers to search but found nothing. Clue 2. Tire tracks. Beside M's body, 2 overlapping tire tracks were found. One of the tire tracks was wide and deep, with no dust scattered around, indicating that the vehicle was moving very slowly. The other tire track was longer, with a lot of dust scattered, indicating that the vehicle was moving fast and had turned around on the spot. Before the storm arrived, the forensic team used plaster to cast these tire tracks. Later, by comparing the tire tracks, the police found that the wide and deep tracks belonged to a tow truck. This tow truck had towed another vehicle near the pond at around 10:30 p.m. The other tire track belonged to M's car. This tire track overlapped the tow truck's track, indicating that M's car arrived later than the tow truck. That is, the crime occurred after 10:30 p.m. So why did M drive to the pond late at night? Was it because the killer lured him there? About 10 miles from the crime scene, they found M's car. The rear of the car had some contact bloodstains. Dr. Lee, through bloodstain testing, confirmed that these bloodstains belonged to M. This showed that the car had been at the crime scene. Therefore, someone must have driven the car away. The person who drove the car was likely the killer. The police immediately examined M's car. They didn't find any fingerprints, as if someone had intentionally wiped them clean. At the crime scene, 2 different shoe prints were found. One was a wavy sole pattern. After comparison, it was determined to belong to the victim, M. The other shoe print was a special hexagonal pattern, likely belonging to the killer. Later, the police found that only one type of shoe from the Korean brand, Foot RO, could leave such shoe prints. But relying on this evidence to find the killer was not easy. In M's clothes, they also found 2 red chewing gum wrappers and a small bag containing white powder. After testing, the powder was just crushed aspirin. Initially, the suspect in this case was clearly Roy, but Detective Game provided an important clue that brought up another suspect. Do you remember the strange request that the victim M had made before? "I want the police to beat me up." M had told Detective Game that he did this to make himself look like he was forced by the police to testify, otherwise Richard would kill me. The Richard that M mentioned was Richard D. He was Roy's older brother. Besides this older brother, Roy also had a younger brother named Ronald. The 3D brothers were notorious in the local area. Everyone in the town knew them. Among them, the most notorious was the eldest brother, Richard. According to police records, Richard had been doing bad things since he was young, with over 20 criminal records. After statistics, people also found an interesting phenomenon whenever Richard was in prison. Local car thefts, burglaries, robberies, etc., would decrease significantly. But whenever Richard was released, these crimes would soar. This shows what kind of person Richard was. Not only that, Richard was also involved in some black market transactions. He could be said to be the #1 criminal in the town. Almost no one in the town dared to touch him. This also explains why M, even though he knew Roy was the arsonist, didn't dare to testify, and even asked the police to beat him before he dared to testify. All of this was because he was afraid of Richard's retaliation. The day after the crime occurred, the police received a tip from an anonymous person saying that Richard had a 9mm pistol and had threatened to kill M. Based on the clues provided by this person, the police applied for a search warrant for Richard's house from the court. The victim's younger brother also provided information. He said that before M died, he had told him that if he died, the killer must be Richard. At this point, all clues pointed to Richard. After obtaining the search warrant, the police immediately conducted an in-depth investigation of Richard. This investigation indeed yielded new findings. In Richard's car, they found chewing gum identical to that found in M's jacket pocket. The police felt there must be some connection between them. The chewing gum manufacturer told the police that the serrated edges of the gum wrappers from the same pack could be pieced together seamlessly. There were also serial numbers on the wrappers. Through the serial numbers, the production line and batch of the gum could be determined. After comparison, the gum found in M's pocket and the gum in Richard's car were not from the same batch. In Richard's car, they found a small light bulb used for lighting. And on M's car, there was exactly one such light bulb missing. The police also specifically asked M's younger brother, Quit. Quit said that the light bulb on M's car was working fine before. Dr. Lee, after comparing the scratches on the bulb and the socket of M's car, found that they matched perfectly. The police speculated that at that time, Richard had driven M's car away from the scene. But he was afraid that others would see his face. So he removed the light bulb. Then, he conveniently put it into his own car. In Richard's car, they found footprints. Through testing, the sole pattern was a special hexagonal shape, confirmed to be from the Foot RO brand. Everyone still remembers that such footprints were also found at the crime scene. However, the police did not find such Foot RO shoes at Richard's house. But the police saw in a photo that Richard was wearing exactly such a pair of Foot RO shoes. However, the shoes could only prove that Richard had been to the crime scene but could not directly prove that he was the killer. Under the soles of M's shoes, they also found some blue nylon fibers. These fibers were identical to the material of the carpet in Richard's car. This indicated that M might have gotten into Richard's car or a car with an identical carpet. In Richard's bedroom, they found a newspaper. The front page was news about Roy setting fire to the town hall. In the wardrobe at Richard's house, they found a belt. This type of belt was used by many criminals because it could perfectly hide a pistol inside. Many local residents said that Richard often wore this type of belt. The police suspected that Richard had hidden the gun in this belt. Then, when M was not paying attention, suddenly attacked him. At the same time, they also found a gun cleaning kit. Dr. Lee conducted experiments with the belt and found complete traces of a pistol. The police approached Richard for questioning. Richard denied killing M and said that on the night M was killed, he was not in town at all but had gone to a bar in the northwest to drink. After drinking, he went to his younger brother Ronald's house. Between 12:30 and 1:30 a.m., his car broke down in Torrington. So he called his brother Ronald to pick him up. At that time, he had parked his car in front of the Tony Hotel. However, local patrol officers said that until about 3:30 a.m., they did not see Richard's car parked in front of the Tony Hotel. Although the investigators tried their best to find contradictions in Richard's statements, there was still no evidence to prove that Richard was the killer. The investigators had to search everywhere, hoping to find direct witnesses. But in the town, no one was willing to reveal information. They were all afraid of ending up like M in a situation where there was only some circumstantial evidence. It was still not enough to convict Richard. At this time, the police urgently needed a breakthrough. Since the town residents refused to cooperate, the police targeted Richard's younger brother, Ronald. Ronald was the youngest of the 3D brothers. To the police's surprise, although these three brothers were not good people, they were very united internally. Using conventional methods to get clues from Ronald was almost impossible. In this stalemate, the police began to play their fisherman role. First, the police obtained information that Ronald was trafficking illegal goods through informants. Then, the police set up a trap, sending undercover officers posing as buyers. Finally, they caught Ronald red-handed. Ronald was arrested and faced up to 20 years in prison. The police advised him to confess to get a reduced sentence. After careful consideration, Ronald finally decided to cooperate with the police. He told the police that he had bought a stolen 9mm pistol and then sold it to his brother Richard. The police immediately investigated the stolen property records and indeed found a record of a stolen 9mm pistol. The owner was David Wheeler. The police approached David and asked if he had kept any shell casings and bullets fired from that gun. David took the police to the forest where he often went shooting. There were many shell casings and bullets there. Dr. Lee immediately compared the bullets found with the 2 bullets found at the crime scene. The results showed that the scratches on them matched perfectly. It could be determined that these bullets were all fired from the same gun. At this point, the crucial weapon in this case, the pistol, had been identified. And the last person known to possess it was Richard. On the belt at his house, there were also traces of the gun. But it still couldn't prove that the person who fired the gun was Richard. To convict Richard, this circumstantial evidence was still not enough. The police still needed witnesses. The town residents were all afraid of retaliation. No one dared to come forward to provide clues. After careful consideration, the police thought that if Richard continued to evade the law, the residents would never dare to stand up. Therefore, the police decided to play their final trump card. They knew that a skilled fisherman not only knows how to fish but also how to cast nets. Richard was the biggest illegal goods dealer in the area and had long been in the police's sights. The police also had a lot of evidence, just waiting for the right time to arrest him. At this point, they might as well take this opportunity to cast the net. The police received a tip that Richard hid illegal goods in the forest near a school in the town. Therefore, the Connecticut SWAT team, wearing camouflage uniforms, ambushed in the forest. When Richard came to get the goods, he was caught red-handed. Under the pressure of solid evidence, Richard was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. However, he was not afraid. In prison, he even sent a congratulatory card to Detective Game, saying, "I just consider this a vacation. I'll be back soon." After the town residents heard that Richard was arrested, many people who had personally heard Richard say he would kill M came forward to testify for the police. At the same time, Dr. Henry Lee also reconstructed the crime scene. When the crime occurred, it was autumn, and the ground was soft. When reconstructing the crime scene, it was winter, and the ground was hard. To better recreate the entire process of the crime, Dr. Lee arranged for a truck to bring soft sand and spread it on the riverbank where the crime occurred. Based on the position in which M fell, he had been shot 3 times, leading to death. At the scene, 3 shell casings were also found, but only 2 bullets. By using a similar gun to conduct shooting experiments and observing the amount of gunpowder residue left at different distances, it could be determined that when the first bullet hit the victim, M was standing. The bullet went through M's neck and then embedded in the woods behind the pond. This was the bullet that the police had not yet found. After being shot, M quickly fell to the ground. The killer then stepped forward and fired 2 more shots. Based on the direction of M's wounds, it was deduced that the killer fired from behind and beside M at that time. No signs of struggle were found at the scene, indicating that the killer had suddenly fired when M was off guard, likely having planned the murder. At this point, through reconstructing the crime scene, Dr. Lee had basically deduced the entire process of the crime. On the night of the crime, Richard met with M, saying he wanted him to try some good stuff. M, of course, understood what Richard meant and immediately agreed. Then, Richard told M to drive to the pond where the crime occurred, saying the goods were hidden there. Richard took out the goods and gave them to M, but in fact, it was just crushed aspirin. Then the two stood by the river talking, aiming to make M drop his guard. Therefore, many footprints were left at the crime scene. Finally, Richard took advantage of M's unpreparedness, pulled out the gun hidden in his belt, and shot him. M was shot and fell to the ground. In the process of falling, he hit his own car, so there were bloodstains on the car. Richard then stepped forward and fired 2 more shots. After doing all this, Richard got into M's car, turned it around, and quickly left the scene. Therefore, the car kicked up dust when leaving. While driving, Richard was afraid that passers-by would see his face and recognize him. So he removed the small light bulb in the car. After doing all this, to create an alibi, he deliberately drove his own car to Torrington for his brother Ronald to pick him up. He believed that his brother would not betray him. In 1990, after 3 years of hard investigation, the prosecution finally charged Richard with third-degree murder. Currently, the evidence held by the prosecution included a handful of blue fibers, the small light bulb from M's car, the hexagonal shoe prints, the gun traces on the belt, and the 9mm pistol that was not found but had been proven to belong to Richard. Although this evidence all pointed to Richard as the killer, it was all circumstantial. Whether the court would accept this evidence was still uncertain. In court, Dr. Henry Lee connected the evidence, listing them one by one. Facing this truthful and detailed evidence, Richard began to panic. To evade guilt, Richard publicly declared that his brother Roy was the one who killed them. As soon as he said this, Roy felt a chill down his spine. He didn't expect his own brother to falsely accuse him to save himself. The previously solid united front among the three brothers suddenly collapsed. Roy and Ronald also realized the situation. Their eldest brother Richard seemed unlikely to escape conviction. Therefore, they mustered up the courage and decided to take the stand to reveal everything, actively confirming that Richard was the one who killed them. Ronald said that in the early morning of the day of the crime, when he drove to Torrington to pick up his brother Richard, his brother told him that he had killed them on the way back. Richard also told him to stop the car by the river. Then Richard took a bag containing a pair of shoes and went out. When he returned, the bag was gone. The police suspected that Richard had disposed of the shoes he wore during the crime. Perhaps the murder weapon was also in there. However, when divers went to search, they only found a gun holster. The police confirmed the gun holster with David, who had previously lost his gun, and it matched perfectly with the holster he had lost. The police believed that the series of physical evidence and the crime process had no problems, all proving that Richard was the killer. With Ronald's testimony, the court finally declared Richard guilty of third-degree murder, sentencing him to 60 years in prison. The number one criminal in this small town was finally brought to justice. The residents were extremely happy upon hearing this news, no longer having to live in fear. They thought the case had ended here. Unexpectedly, in 1992, there was a sudden change. The Connecticut Supreme Court overturned Richard's murder conviction and decided to retry the case. The reason was that the court accepted Richard's appeal, excluding much of the evidence used to convict him, believing that the police's initial search warrant for Richard was illegal because the evidence used to apply for the search warrant was insufficient. Richard's lawyer, Liz, said that the day after M's body was found, the police obtained a search warrant for Richard's house. But the evidence used to apply for the search warrant was only the statement of an anonymous person saying that Richard possessed a 9mm pistol and might have used it to kill them. This single statement was not enough to prove that Richard was the killer and insufficient to obtain a search warrant. Finally, the Supreme Court ruled that the reason for issuing the search warrant was insufficient. The evidence found from Richard's truck and house through the illegal search warrant could not be used in court. This news was undoubtedly a huge blow to the investigators who had worked hard for 8 years, painstakingly connecting all the evidence to bring the killer to justice. Now, they were told that the evidence was invalid. Prosecutor Frank McCourt said that if the court did not allow us to use this evidence, it would be a big problem. We had to consider whether the remaining evidence was enough to convict Richard. If the new trial did not convict Richard, it would undoubtedly be a tragedy for the town residents. M's 84-year-old uncle, Hugh M., said that if Richard were released, the lives of many town residents would be in danger. All those who testified against him would die. If the court wanted to witness more murders, then release him. In fact, his words represented the mood of all the town residents at that time. Everyone was very afraid, worried that Richard would retaliate after being released, especially those who had stood up to testify against him. Subsequently, the police reorganized the evidence of Richard's crimes. But since much evidence could not be used, the prosecution was not entirely sure whether they could convict Richard. But unexpectedly, Richard in court suddenly expressed his willingness to plead guilty, hoping the court would be lenient. Finally, the court sentenced Richard to 15 years in prison. As for Roy, for the crime of arson of the town hall, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. At this point, the 3D brothers, who had terrorized the town residents, were all in prison. Life in the town returned to its previous peace. Not long after, the town hall was rebuilt according to the original design. After reconstruction, the town hall remained the iconic architectural work of the area. 2 years after being imprisoned, Richard died in prison due to heart disease. After serving 14 years, Roy returned to the town. The town residents also said that he had been punished by the law and they were willing to accept his return to the town. The two cases that occurred in this small town can be said to be closely related. A case within a case, having a profound impact on Connecticut's history. Later, many people in charge of investigating this case said that it was very complicated. There were no witnesses, and physical evidence was very limited. Without Dr. Henry Lee's sophisticated forensic techniques and meticulous analysis of every detail, this case would have been nearly impossible to solve. Although the case was eventually solved, the investigators' repeated difficulties during the investigation process are still worth our reflection. The town residents, although having many grievances against the 3D brothers, did not want to, or rather, did not dare to stand up and provide clues. So when we encounter similar situations, what should we do? As weak individuals, can we only endure or submit? Perhaps what such vulnerable groups lack is the strength of unity. A spirit of unitedly exposing dark forces is the duty of every citizen. Today's video ends here, and see you in the next video. Goodbye. Hello. Bangkok is the largest city in Thailand and also the political, economic, cultural, and transportation center of the country. To the west of Bangkok lies the Kannam district, a vibrant and lively place. Although it is not large in area, it is an indispensable part of Bangkok. Its name in Thai means, the homeland of the plumeria flower. Possibly because many of these trees used to be planted there. The main character of our story is named Apachai, living in the Kannam district. Although he is not yet married, he is charming and sincere. And he has never lacked girlfriends. His family is wealthy, but his father passed away early. His mother and younger sister moved elsewhere. Apachai inherited a vast fortune. He pays great attention to his personal image, taking excellent care of his skin, making it difficult for others to guess his true age. At 41, he is a wealthy and famous man in the local area, owning assets worth millions along with a mansion, becoming the object of admiration for many. But behind that glamorous life, a dark current is silently flowing. On Thursday, September 9, 2020, an atmosphere of tension and seriousness enveloped the headquarters of the Bangkok Metropolitan Police. Investigators were busy handling various cases, among which one case particularly attracted attention. Inside the interrogation room, a man in his 40s named Chalermsong was sitting on the interrogation chair. He had been arrested on suspicion of drug use. In Thailand, drug offenses are punished very severely, and Chalermsong was well aware of this. To lighten his sentence, he decided to provide the police with an important clue. He had witnessed a murder. Chalermsong confessed that his occupation was working as a bodyguard at a mansion in the Kannam district. This mansion was very luxurious, covering an area of 22.000 square meters, equivalent to 4 standard football fields. Inside the mansion was a 2-story house built with white bricks and gray tiles. Behind the house was a beautiful garden surrounded by 3 ponds. The owner of the mansion was a wealthy 41-year-old businessman named Apachai. He had a 22-year-old girlfriend named Wantong Chaz, commonly known as Kik. She was slim, attractive, gentle, and lively, with many suitors. Since dating businessman Apachai, she had been living in the mansion. Chalermsong told the police that in August 2019, while working at the mansion, he saw a conflict between Apachai and Kik. The argument gradually escalated into a physical altercation. Apachai had a tendency toward violence. Whenever he argued with someone, he would use physical force. And this time was no exception. He used a wooden stick to strike Kik's head. She couldn't resist and collapsed to the ground. But he didn't stop there. He tied her hands and feet and locked her in a sturdy metal box. According to Chalermsong's testimony, after being locked in the metal box, Kik began to scream in despair, using all her strength to kick the sides of the box, hoping someone would hear her cries for help. To drown out her screams, Apachai turned up loud music in the house. Chalermsong continued to work at the mansion and had a good relationship with Kik. Seeing her being treated like that, he felt his boss's actions were wrong. At times, he even thought about secretly rescuing Kik from that cold metal box. However, fearing he might lose his job, he pretended as if nothing had happened. Unfortunately, when the metal box was opened the next day, the scene before him was something he could never forget. Kik had become a stiff corpse. He then received orders from Apachai, instructing him to put the body into a black plastic bag, wrap it in bedsheets, place it back into the metal box, and bury it in the backyard. Chalermsong had never witnessed such a scene before. He was filled with fear. He was afraid he would be implicated in the murder because he had helped handle the corpse and would have to face legal punishment. So he stood frozen in place, not daring to move until Apachai threw him a bag of cash. The temptation of money helped him overcome his inner turmoil and complete this horrific task. After understanding the whole situation, the police immediately went to Apachai's mansion. When they arrived at the scene and prepared to search, they found that an intoxicated Apachai had opened fire on the police. Under the influence of alcohol, the scene immediately turned into a fierce gun battle, bullets flying like rain. In the end, the police overpowered and arrested a naked Apachai. Although the situation was dangerous, no police officers were injured. Based on Chalermsong's testimony, the police excavated the garden behind the house. Indeed, they found a metal box measuring 70 centimeters long, 40 centimeters wide, and 45 centimeters high, buried 1 meter deep in the ground. Inside the box was a female body, along with a black plastic bag and bedsheets used to wrap the corpse. Although the forensic team conducted a thorough examination of the body, they still could not determine the cause of death. Through a large, colorful carp tattoo on the back of the body and DNA test reports, the police confirmed the identity of the victim. It was the 22-year-old Kik. It is known that Kik was born in Chiang Mai and was raised by her grandmother under difficult circumstances. A year earlier, at the beginning of 2019, she came to Bangkok hoping for a brighter future. She worked as a waitress in a bar and sometimes engaged in sex work. Although her income was relatively stable, the pressures of life were still great. She not only had to raise her child from a previous marriage alone but also had to face monthly bills and living expenses. Therefore, she often fell into financial difficulties. Even after saving and cutting expenses, she sometimes had to borrow money from friends or colleagues to make ends meet. One time, Kik met Apachai and noticed his wealth. Similarly, Apachai was attracted by Kik's beauty. He frequented the bar more and more and didn't hesitate to express his feelings for her. The two began dating regularly at the bar and quickly developed an ambiguous relationship. Not long after, Kik discovered that behind Apachai's wealth were dark secrets. His assets not only came from his father's inheritance but also from dealing and using drugs. He was also a longtime target of police surveillance. But they still lacked concrete evidence to arrest him. This made Apachai become reckless, and his actions grew bolder. Under his influence, Kik gradually fell into drug use, and her life began to spiral out of control. The more he loved Kik, the more possessive Apachai became. He demanded that Kik avoid contact with other men and forced her to move in with him at the mansion. He pressured her to quit her job as a waitress at the bar. But she refused. Kik promised him that when working, she would try to limit contact with male customers to appease his dissatisfaction. Although he was still unhappy, he reluctantly accepted. However, this superficial compromise didn't last long. Apachai soon changed. One evening in July 2019, Kik returned to the mansion with swollen red eyes and tears welling up. Seeing her like that, he couldn't help but wonder and quickly approached to ask what had happened. Under his concerned gaze, Kik recounted the unpleasant experience she had at the bar. It turned out she had just been harassed by a male customer. In panic and distress, she instinctively resisted and luckily escaped his clutches. Immediately, Apachai took Kik to the police station to report the incident. After the incident, he insisted that she quit her job. Under pressure and psychological trauma, Kik had no choice but to agree. The police also conducted an investigation into the man's identity. However, the bar where Kik worked was not well managed. Anyone could enter freely. Moreover, the quality of the surveillance cameras was poor and couldn't clearly capture the man's face. A month later, when the police tried to contact Kik for updates, They found that her phone number was always unreachable. At the same time, Kik's grandmother hadn't been able to contact her for many days and reported her missing to the police in mid-August 2019. Due to the special nature of Kik's work, the police did not pay much attention to this incident and didn't realize she had met with misfortune until bodyguard Chalermsong came forward to reveal the truth. The suspect, Apachai, was born in 1979 into a wealthy family. His father was a well-known local businessman who owned a large market. The market covered a vast area, with bustling crowds and diverse goods. It was not only the family's source of wealth but also a symbol of their social prestige and status locally. From birth, Apachai lived in material abundance, never having to worry about money. However, fate took a swift turn. In 1983, a teenage girl who was doing daily cleaning work accidentally knocked her cleaning tools into a fish tank that his father cherished dearly. The rare and precious fish in the tank were startled, swimming chaotically. Witnessing this scene, his father flew into a rage. Without caring that she was still a minor, he brutally killed her. After learning of the incident, his mother chose to remain silent. Not only did she not report it to the police, but she also helped her husband hide the body. However, the matter eventually came to light. His father was immediately arrested. Fearing the consequences, his mother took his younger sister and left Thailand, never to return. His father didn't live to see his trial date. Before the court session, he died in a mysterious shooting incident. There were rumors that the shooter was hired by his mother. After this upheaval, 14-year-old Apachai inherited a massive fortune. But in the house, he was all alone, without his mother and sister by his side. Occasionally, distant relatives would come to take care of him, renting out the properties his father left behind to earn living expenses. However, they paid little attention to his daily life. The boy lived alone in the mansion from a young age. Neighbors often saw him wandering the nearby streets, looking very lonely. Time passed quickly. Apachai lived alone in that mansion for over 30 years until his crime of killing Kik was exposed in 2020. During the investigation, a resident revealed to the police that there might be other bodies hidden in the ponds near his house. After receiving this new clue, they dispatched 20 divers simultaneously to search 3 ponds. These ponds were about the same size, with an average depth of 1.5 meters and the deepest point at 3 meters. After much effort, the divers found a rusted metal box shaped like a cube, measuring 60 centimeters on each side, at the bottom of one of the ponds covering 3.200 square meters. Inside the box was a human skull that was not intact, a rib cage, and over 30 other bone fragments. The box also contained an 8 kilograms weight tightly bound with a chain. Through forensic examination, the victim was a petite woman around 18 years old. Due to prolonged submersion, the bones had turned black. The time of death was over 8 years ago, and the cause of death was undetermined. Inside the house of the mansion, the police seized a large quantity of drugs, 6 pistols, 332 bullets, 20 knives, handcuffs, and bulletproof vests. Manufacturing and trafficking drugs are extremely serious crimes in Thailand, punishable by death. Given the grave nature of the case, the police intensified their investigation, deploying an additional 20 divers to expand the search area. They groped in the murky waters and found 288 human bone fragments. These bone fragments were wrapped in clothing and submerged under a large iron gate at the bottom of the pond. The design of this iron gate was similar to the gate style that Apachai was using at his house. A chain and an 8 kilograms weight were also tied to the gate. These bone fragments were broken into small pieces the size of leaves, making it hard to imagine the gruesome scene of the killer disposing of the bodies. Due to the large number of bone fragments, it was not yet possible to determine whether they belonged to the same person. However, based on some bone fragments, it was speculated that they belonged to a young girl aged 12 to 15. The police continued searching the ponds for another 6 days and found a human bone fragment that had turned black. Subsequently, more and more bone fragments were discovered. According to statistics and analysis, a total of 28 ribs were found. Additionally, they discovered some strands of hair and a lower jawbone with 8 intact teeth. These remains belonged to a 17 to 18-year-old woman. After comparing DNA, the police confirmed they matched the skull found in the previous cubic metal box. Currently, Apachai was linked to at least 3 murders. The police began to review missing person cases involving women in recent years, hoping to identify the victims. According to investigations, in 2011, a girl about 18 years old had mysteriously disappeared. She was petite, with short, asymmetrical hair. When friends couldn't contact her, they reported it to the police. The police posted her image through various channels, hoping to find her relatives. But unfortunately, there were no results. Additionally, a 12-year-old girl had gone missing after playing near Apachai's mansion and never returned home. Due to the lack of DNA samples, the police couldn't determine whether the bone fragments found in the pond belonged to that girl. During deeper investigations, the police also discovered several other missing persons cases related to Apachai. The missing individuals included friends, ex-girlfriends, and bar employees associated with him. This wasn't the first time he had committed a crime. In 2008, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for assaulting a woman. The time spent in prison didn't make him repent. In 2012, after completing his sentence, he was imprisoned again for assaulting and illegally detaining a 17-year-old girl. During the investigation of that case, the police found guns, tasers, and other dangerous items at his mansion. Therefore, he was sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison. After his second release, he still didn't change his behavior until he was arrested again. After hearing about his arrest, some residents came to the police station to report that in December 2019, he had assaulted an underage girl and threatened her not to report it. Fearing retaliation, the girl chose to remain silent and accepted 100,000 baht from him as hush money. It wasn't until after his arrest that she bravely came forward to accuse his crimes. His past crimes showed that he had no remorse. When questioned by the police, he insisted he didn't intentionally harm Kik. When asked about the other bones retrieved from the pond, he said he knew nothing and suggested that it might have been the neighbors. According to his testimony, on the day of the incident, he and Kik had a fierce argument over their relationship. Kik wanted to break up with him to get back with her ex-boyfriend. They argued for a long time, tired and unwilling to argue further. In a moment of losing control, he handcuffed her hands and feet and locked her in a metal box, hoping both would calm down and also to prevent her from sneaking away at night. However, when he opened the metal box the next morning, he found that she had died. Only then did he realize he had caused a great disaster. It turned out that the metal box was used to store liquids in. When closed, was completely airtight. Kik might have died from suffocation. Facing her corpse, he felt guilty. He wanted her to rest in peace but didn't want to lose her. So he buried her in the backyard. However, the truth was more brutal than what he described. Upon carefully examining Kik's body, the police found many obvious injuries. Her right ribs and chest cavity were fractured, her skull was cracked, indicating she had been brutally beaten before death. The level of violence far exceeded that of a normal argument or accidental injury. When confronted about this, he explained that during the argument, he angrily pushed her. Unexpectedly, she lost balance and crashed heavily into a shelf. Due to the impact, a weight on the shelf fell and unfortunately hit her, causing injuries but not fatal ones. Then, seemingly realizing the implausibility of his words, he changed his testimony, saying that she died from a drug overdose. Of course, the police didn't believe his clumsy excuses. Bodyguard Chalermsong could also testify that he had indeed assaulted Kik. All the evidence formed a chain pointing to his criminal actions. A month after his arrest in September 2020, the case was brought to trial at the Minburi Criminal Court. Defendant Apachai was charged with more than 10 counts, including murder, concealing a corpse, and drug-related offenses. Due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that year, all court proceedings were conducted online. At the trial, an ex-girlfriend of his testified. She tearfully accused his strong controlling and possessive behavior, as well as the abuse and beatings she endured while dating him. Additionally, the girl he assaulted in 2019 bravely took the stand, recounting the details of the incident, providing important evidence to the court. The judge believed that although the court couldn't provide conclusive evidence on whether Kik died from suffocation in the metal box, considering the curled-up position of the victim in the narrow metal box when discovered, her knees pressed against her chest, which could lead to breathing difficulties, along with other evidence, the judge concluded that there was no doubt that defendant Apachai had intentionally killed Kik. Facing the mounting evidence, initially, he still tried to justify his crimes. But as the evidence piled up, his defenses became weaker. Ultimately, faced with irrefutable proof, he chose to remain silent, since there was no direct evidence proving he manufactured and trafficked drugs. He avoided the death penalty. After a year of trial, the case concluded. The court declared defendant Apachai guilty of murder and other charges, sentencing him to life imprisonment and a fine of 4.21 million baht, approximately 3.1 billion Vietnamese dongs at current exchange rates. With the bang of the judge's gavel, the case was closed, and he had to pay for the crimes he committed. Kik's grandmother held a photo of her granddaughter and accepted an interview. She wept as she said that although justice had been served, her granddaughter would never return. This case caused a strong shock locally, with major media outlets reporting on it. They gave him the nickname, Metal Box Killer. Although over 300 bone fragments were found in the pond, for various reasons, accurate DNA information couldn't be extracted, making it impossible for the police to determine the specific identities of the remains or even the number of victims. However, one thing is certain, he was a serial killer. Local residents rumored that he raised hundreds of alligator gars in his ponds. This is one of the largest freshwater fish species, known for its crocodile-like appearance and long, sharp teeth. It's an extremely ferocious predatory fish. There were rumors that he raised them to dispose of bodies. Some people believe that the police did not pay enough attention to the disappearances of women engaged in sex work, leading to the occurrence of these murders. Due to the special nature of the profession, every year in Thailand, many sex workers go missing. Additionally, some questioned why the police didn't drain the ponds to make it easier to search for clues. Regarding this question, the police did not provide a direct answer. In a subsequent interview, a police officer from the Bangkok Metropolitan Police revealed that because the ponds were quite large, draining the water would take over a week. To save time and costs, the police chose to search underwater. According to local residents, since the court's verdict, the house in his mansion has become a haunted house. Every midnight, neighbors hear the cries of women coming from inside, sending chills down their spines. These rumors have attracted some people to explore and test their courage. As time passed, the once magnificent mansion is now overgrown with weeds. Every brick and stone tells the story of past glory and crimes. It witnessed the destruction of many lives, standing silently as a mute witness to a dark chapter of history. Today's video ends here, and see you in the next video. Goodbye. In 2006, a case occurred in Malaysia that shocked the entire world. The methods used in the crime were extremely cruel and unprecedented. Behind this case, there were extensive connections, even involving high-ranking officials. Although this case wasn't a cold case, it resembled one. The perpetrator was arrested and convicted by the police. But arresting the perpetrator didn't mean the case was clear. Questions arose about whether there was a mastermind manipulating everything from behind the scenes. To this day, the full motives and the truth remain unclear, submerged in power struggles. So, what exactly happened that year? Let's turn back time to 2006 to piece together the details of the case. Malaysia, abbreviated as MAI, is located in Southeast Asia, relatively close to China. Therefore, over 20% of Malaysia's population are ethnic Chinese. The capital, Kuala Lumpur, is not only the most populous city but also the largest in Malaysia. The scenery here is picturesque, a rare tourist paradise, and today's story takes place here. On October 20, 2006, a young woman named Duna went to the Mongolian embassy in Thailand to report that her cousin had gone missing in Malaysia. Since Mongolia doesn't have an embassy in Malaysia, after reporting to the Malaysian police, she hurried to Thailand to inform the embassy. Embassies usually don't take missing person cases very seriously. However, when Duna told the embassy staff that her cousin was Altantuya Sheribu, the receptionist's attitude immediately changed upon hearing that name. She quickly asked what had happened. Duna said, "Yesterday, my cousin said she was going to meet someone and told me to wait at the hotel. Before leaving, she told me that if she hadn't returned by midnight, I should immediately report to the police." Hearing this, the embassy staff felt something was wrong and immediately reported the situation to their superiors, beginning a coordinated search for Altantuya. So, who is Altantuya that the Mongolian embassy took her disappearance so seriously upon hearing her name? Altantuya Sheribu, we'll refer to her as A, was born in 1978 into a middle-class family in Russia. Her parents were both Mongolians working in Russia. Her father was a university professor, and her mother was a teacher. During her childhood, A was educated in Russia. Growing up in such a unique environment, she became fluent in several languages from a young age. Her mother tongue, Mongolian, was naturally not a problem. At school, she also learned Russian and English. Later, she even learned Chinese and French. A truly had a talent for languages. In addition, she was very beautiful, with many praising her for having a star's face. In 1990, A's family moved back to Mongolia. After returning, she became infatuated with a Mongolian singer named Madai. At that time, Madai was the lead singer of the famous Mongolian band Black Rose and was the idol of countless Mongolian girls. Perhaps A's beauty also caught Madai's attention. In 1996, when A was only 18, she quickly married Madai. News of the famous male singer getting married was significant in Mongolia. Images of the two often appeared in newspapers and media, and A also became famous. Young and beautiful, she suddenly went from an ordinary person to the focus of the entertainment industry. However, this marriage did not last long. Even though they had a child, although the two divorced, A's prominence did not fade. Relying on her looks and intelligence, she secured a firm position in the social circles of Mongolian celebrities, establishing her own status. A even considered becoming a model, so she went to France for modeling training. However, for some reason, this did not materialize. Frequenting celebrity circles, A met her second husband, the son of a famous designer named Guna. Guna was a wealthy heir. This marked her second marriage, which once again made her famous among the Mongolian upper class. Through this, she got to know many figures in high society. History, however, seemed to repeat itself. This marriage also ended quickly. Even though she had given birth to another child, 2 consecutive failed marriages did not affect A's career development. From then on, she used her connections to engage in the clothing export business. She frequently visited high-end places in Beijing, Singapore, Malaysia, and other locations. Some people said that her clothing export business was just a front, a legitimate reason to frequently visit upscale venues to interact with influential figures. The specific truth is unknown. Therefore, for Mongolians, A was definitely a well-known figure. It's not surprising that embassy staff, upon hearing her name, immediately changed their attitude and acted quickly. Regarding the disappearance of A, the Malaysian police did not initially take it seriously. Fortunately, the Mongolian embassy in Thailand put pressure on the Malaysian police, stating that there might be a crime involved. However, the investigation did not proceed smoothly. Every time a new clue appeared, it would mysteriously vanish, which was very strange. Investigators also mentioned feeling that an invisible hand was obstructing the progress of the case. More than a month later, the Malaysian police finally found A in a desolate place in the Shah Alam district near Kuala Lumpur. To be precise, they found a pile of rubble. The scene was so gruesome that many police officers couldn't stand it and became ill. After DNA testing, it was confirmed that it was indeed A. Who did she offend to meet such a tragic end? After carefully examining the remaining body parts, in addition to 2 gunshot wounds, traces of explosives were found. From the evidence at the scene, it could be determined that A was tied to a tree. Then explosives, C4, were attached to her body and detonated. This type of plastic explosive is highly stable, can be shaped into any form, and is considered a powerful explosive. In Malaysia, such explosives are usually only accessible to the government and police. At this point, investigators realized that this case was not simple and might involve high-level officials. After the news of A's death was revealed, the people of Malaysia and Mongolia were extremely shocked. The method of using explosives was extremely cruel and unheard of. The Mongolian people were even more outraged. A was a famous person in Mongolia. Yet she died tragically in Malaysia in such a manner. Moreover, there might be involvement of high-ranking officials in Malaysia. The public collectively pressured the government. The Mongolian government also exerted pressure on the Malaysian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Malaysian police in charge of investigating the case felt enormous pressure. On one hand, this case involved diplomacy with Mongolia. On the other hand, those involved might be officials within their own government. Investigators lamented, unsure whether to investigate thoroughly or go through the motions. Under public demand and governmental pressure, the investigation continued. In the subsequent investigation, the truth gradually emerged, shocking everyone. The Malaysian police examined A's relationships and, combined with information provided by her cousin Duna, quickly identified a suspect, Abdul Razak Baginda. Abdul was not an ordinary person. He was a staff member at the Malaysian Strategic Research Center and an advisor to the Malaysian Ministry of Defense. The police also learned that Abdul and A had maintained a romantic relationship. According to Duna, around 2004, A's life changed significantly. Not only did her financial situation improve, but she also frequently flew to Malaysia, evidently to be with Abdul. Later, whenever Abdul went abroad on business, A would accompany him. Moreover, A, fluent in several languages, served as a translator for Abdul. She once showed Duna photos of her traveling abroad with him. In 2006, at the age of 28, A became pregnant. For Abdul, this was unwelcome news because he was already married with a 19-year-old daughter. More importantly, he was a public figure, perceived as a good husband and father. If his affair with A was exposed, it would likely affect his career, and he might even lose his job. On the contrary, A, after becoming pregnant, desired a formal status, hoping Abdul would divorce his wife. Abdul did not agree, viewing the relationship as a fling. Therefore, A and Abdul quarreled multiple times without resolution. This time, A and her cousin went to Malaysia to confront Abdul. Even if she couldn't obtain a formal status, she wanted a substantial sum as compensation for her youth and to support the child. Subsequently, A mysteriously disappeared and was found dead, making Abdul a significant suspect. In the subsequent investigation, 3 other important suspects were arrested, all of whom were Malaysian police officers. Among them, 2 had special identities, Azila Hadri and Sirul Azhar Umar. Both belonged to the Malaysian Special Actions Unit, a special police force specializing in serious crimes and counter-terrorism. Additionally, they served as bodyguards for the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense at the time. After Azila and Sirul were arrested, the case became even more sensational, involving government officials and elite police officers. This news shook Malaysia. More people realized the complexity and depth of the matter. According to the police investigation, Azila and Sirul had no connection with A. They didn't even know her. According to their statements, they were just following orders. When asked whose orders, suspicions pointed toward Abdul. With this information, the police arrested Abdul. He admitted to having a relationship with A but firmly denied instigating others to commit murder. Despite his denial, he faced charges of instigating murder, and the 2 senior police officers were charged with murder. At this point, the details seemed clear, and the next step was awaiting the court's judgment. However, was everything truly that simple? Reflecting further reveals inconsistencies. A's initial request was for formal recognition, later changing to a monetary demand. For someone like Abdul, fulfilling such a request wouldn't have been difficult. He was a prominent figure, not lacking in wealth. Resolving the matter financially would have been preferable to risking his future with violent actions. Moreover, using such extreme methods, like explosives, seemed unnecessary. Could there be hidden facets to this case? Was it merely a crime of passion? Or was there a larger conspiracy? Indeed, not long after, a French journalist, Arnaud Dubus, after in-depth investigation, published significant news in the French newspaper, Libération. Arnaud suggested that Altantuya's murder was likely related to a major scandal involving the Malaysian government. According to the report, in March 2005, Altantuya and Abdul went to Europe together. While the trip appeared to be for leisure, Abdul was actually acting as a broker in a weapons purchase deal for the deputy prime minister at the time. They planned to purchase 2 submarines from France. Previously, in 2002, Malaysia had signed a contract for submarine purchases with France, and Abdul was there to discuss specific details. Possibly due to confidential information involved, Abdul didn't hire an official translator but brought Altantuya to translate. The deal was concluded swiftly, but an issue arose when €114 million were transferred to a company controlled by Abdul's wife, an apparent commission. This substantial sum was speculated to have been shared between the deputy prime minister and Abdul. Such embezzlement of state funds couldn't be exposed, and Altantuya, who was involved throughout the process, became a potential threat. To manage this risk, Abdul allegedly promised her $500 as hush money. For unknown reasons, this payment was delayed repeatedly. Altantuya demanded the money multiple times, but Abdul kept postponing. On October 19, 2006, the day before her disappearance, she went to confront Abdul, seeking the $500 she believed was owed to her. Subsequently, she went missing. Therefore, the case might not have been a simple crime of passion but potentially involved attempts to cover up a significant bribery scandal. Arnaud's report elevated the case, causing a global sensation. If true, it implicated high-ranking officials and pointed toward governmental corruption. The deletion of Altantuya's immigration records and airport surveillance footage suggested interference beyond the capabilities of ordinary individuals. Deputy Prime Minister Najib Razak was thrust into the spotlight. Questions arose about his possible connection to Altantuya's death. In response, Abdul publicly declared his relationship with Altantuya but stated that Najib was not involved. Najib also denied knowing Altantuya, calling the journalist's claims fabricated and defamatory, even willing to swear his innocence in a mosque. However, Duna, Altantuya's cousin, believed otherwise. She claimed that her cousin had shown her a photograph of herself with Abdul and Najib, taken during a dinner at a restaurant. Duna suggested that the relationships among the three were complex, asserting that Najib did know Altantuya. Interestingly, the journalist Arnaud, who published the exposé, reportedly went into hiding, allegedly due to fear of retaliation. A private detective named Bala also made a statement claiming Najib had a relationship with Altantuya and that he had directed her to Abdul to avoid complications. Bala alleged that on the day Altantuya disappeared, she was taken away by Najib's special assistant, implying Najib's involvement. However, Bala retracted his statement the following day, and he and his family went missing. 15 months later, he resurfaced in India, claiming he had been paid to retract his statement and reaffirmed his original claims, stating he would not return to Malaysia as long as Najib was in power. On October 31, 2008, due to the unavailability of key witnesses and lack of concrete evidence, the High Court declared Abdul innocent and released him. Regarding the trial of Azila and Sirul, the police had 84 witnesses, some of whom had seen them take Altantuya away. They did not contest the prosecution's accusation of using explosives to kill her. After a lengthy trial, they were found guilty of murder in 2009. The two expressed intentions to appeal. Their families did not oppose the verdict and emphasized the absence of political factors. Altantuya's family, however, could not accept this outcome. Believing that the real masterminds had not been held accountable, they appealed and demanded compensation from the Malaysian government, Abdul, and Najib for their suffering due to Altantuya's death. The case faced repeated delays. In 2013, the court accepted the appeals of Azila and Sirul. In a dramatic turn, the court concluded that they had no motive to kill Altantuya and noted procedural issues in the previous trial, including the failure to summon key witnesses. They were acquitted and released. This result was unexpected and met with disbelief by many in Mongolia and Malaysia. The prosecution appealed to the federal court. In 2015, the federal court overturned the acquittal and reinstated the death sentences for Azila and Sirul. By then, Sirul had fled to Australia. Despite Interpol's red notice and his arrest in Australia, he was not extradited back to Malaysia. Azila remained imprisoned in Malaysia, awaiting further developments. Najib Razak became Malaysia's sixth prime minister in 2009 and was re-elected in 2013. However, he was defeated in the 2018 general election. Following his defeat, Altantuya's family petitioned the court for a retrial, believing the true mastermind remained at large. Their request coincided with Najib no longer being in power and received support from the new administration. In December 2019, Azila made a statutory declaration through his lawyer, alleging that Najib was the mastermind behind the murder, claiming that he ordered them to eliminate Altantuya, labeling her a foreign spy and a threat to national security. Azila stated that they acted on orders and had been authorized to obtain explosives to destroy evidence. Fearing retaliation while Najib was in power, they had previously remained silent. Azila expressed willingness to reveal more if the case were retried and apologized to Altantuya's family. Sirul, detained in Australia, also declared his innocence and indicated he would disclose the truth if granted freedom. As of now, a retrial has not occurred. The case remains complex, with contradictory information, possibly due to the involvement of various interests and influences within governmental structures. While there may be inaccuracies in details, the overarching narrative and sequence of events are discernible. Altantuya's tragic fate, intertwined with allegations involving high-ranking officials, remains a dark chapter in Malaysia's history, a story filled with mysteries, intrigue, and power struggles. Despite accusations directed at Najib, he has consistently maintained his innocence. Najib was convicted in a separate corruption case related to the 1MDB fund. But the full truth regarding Altantuya's case remains unresolved. Whether Sirul will speak out in exchange for freedom or if new evidence will surface to unveil the complete truth is uncertain. The answers remain obscured by the complexities of power and political maneuvers. Altantuya's story serves as a poignant reminder of the potential dark sides of power, the fragility of justice, and secrets that may remain buried. Her legacy continues to resonate, prompting calls for truth and justice. Whether the full truth will emerge one day is a hope that persists. Today's discussion ends here. Thank you, and see you in the next session. Goodbye.